Hello everyone. I think we can slowly start next panel. So if you have some colleagues who are outside, please invite them to this debate. Okay. We're here about discuss how to make Europe more competitive in a contemporary world. My guest here is Mr. Okay, Mrs. Minister of Infrastructure and Development, Mrs. Maria Wiesiak. Mr. Andrius Kubilius, former Prime Minister and now leader of opposition in Lithuania. Mrs. Barbara Contini, President of the Italy-USA Foundation and Senator in Italy. And Mr. Hans Timmer, Chief Economics in the World Bank. Okay, thank you. So now we want to concentrate on how Europe could be competitive in a contemporary world, especially in the world of globalization and especially in the European Union. I just want to say that now we have, I think panelists will agree, in the Eurozone and also worldwide still financial crisis, which started 8 years ago. And as Austrian business cycle theory says, that during the crisis we can find out which initiatives, also economic initiatives, were a good idea or which have some faults, which was more damaged during the crisis. So I have a question to our panelists. What, in your opinion, was a good development and competitive idea during the beginning of this century, which find out that is good and which have some faults in the entire world, and what we can learn from that? Maybe Mr. Start from Mr. Tim.
Yeah, Markus Światowa. Dzień dobry.
Good morning.
Forum, and I must say this is a much nicer environment, and this is a much more important forum, because one of the conclusions of the panel we were just in this morning was that we should listen a lot more to young people, because the change will come from there. And while answering this question, I want to start with an anecdote. It's an anecdote about China. My first time in China, way before I joined the World Bank, was in the early 1990s. And I gave a talk to 300 students at Fudang University. That's one of the oldest universities in China, in Shanghai. They were studying economics, and there was word-for-word translation, and at the end there was not a single question, and I had no idea what I was doing there. And then 10 years later, when I had already joined the World Bank, I had the opportunity again to give a talk at the same university, the same number of students, and there was no translation. There was half an hour of what I thought was a very good discussion, And then I had to go, and then a whole group of students came running because they wanted to study abroad. And then 3 years ago, I did it again, and before starting I looked around, and then probably 20% of the students came from abroad, many of them from Europe. And so there you have an example of what really makes an economy change. It is not just investment, although it's very important in China. It is not just the skyline that is changing all the time, but young people are changing, and very importantly, they are opening up. They are looking across the border. And I think that is ultimately what will bring also, again, prosperity in Europe. That Europe, through the young generations, links up with the knowledge that is being created at the global level. And so if you ask me what was a successful program, then I would argue that the Erasmus program was very, very successful. In a very short period in Europe, there was a standardization of higher education. And so that made it possible for young people to continue their studies by going abroad at another university for a year and then to go back again. And it is that kind of openness that, that really makes things happen. Now that generates a society that also have some drawbacks. Because you don't have the normal safeties anymore that you used to have in your own country, and you see big changes now in the labor market for young people. A lot of the people, unlike in the past, they become self-employed. They start selling their own services. A lot of young people, they get temporary contracts. They don't have immediately a career of fixed term. And ultimately, that is a great opportunity, but you, as societies, will have to address the problems there. You can no longer rely on big companies for your social safety net, for your pension system, for your health care. You can no longer rely on big companies for lifelong learning. So there is a role for the governments to make sure that in that very variable world where there's a lot of uncertainty, society as a whole takes care of those safety nets, takes care of lifelong learning, and makes sure that we have a flexible pension system that at least guarantees a minimum income. To summarize, the solution is on your side, where you're sitting. You're living in a very different world where we used to live. That requires adjustments, but I'm very optimistic about Europe.
Okay, thank you. And maybe since Mrs. Contini is president for Italy-USA Foundation, and maybe you can talk something, tell us something more about this whole programs and how it looks in Italy or USA.
Thank you. I have it, thank you. Yes. Well, first of all, I'm also very glad to be here. Yesterday, it was the first day for us in the Economic Forum, and today is very interesting to have you, future leaders, who will run all your countries that you are, where you are born. And there is a big difference. Here there is a hope. There are the problems, where, as we said, that the colleague from the World Bank said, there are problems. We heard yesterday and this morning speaking about a lot of problems. It's true. We are not living a very easy life. We are not living you a very easy life, it's true. We can start maybe a few ideas of what we are doing for you, for your future. What has been done from European side and from the Atlantic side is that a lot of international organizations are working very hard, like NATO, OSCE, European Union, are working very hard for the main problems and the main topics that we are passing now in these months, in these hours, which are incredibly difficult, which is, of course, the problem of migration, the problem of terrorism, the problem of security, not only in Europe, but also in front of us, in Middle East and in Africa. And you probably will lead this organization in the future. Maybe some of you will work with OSCE or lead some of the NATO group in Brussels, or maybe in the UN organization. I personally have been in all of these organizations for the last 27 years of my life. And I started with a strong dynamism, and to tell you the truth, also being a woman, and I see that there are a lot of women, I'm very glad for this year. I started 30 years ago like you, going abroad, out of Italy, out of this very small Europe, which is now, you can imagine, geographically speaking, is very small, is very small. If you look at it from China, from Korea, from the other side of the world, or from Latin America, or from South Africa, all the BRICS countries, the new economy countries. This Italy and this Europe is very small. That's why we need to make it stronger. We need to make it stronger, and how we have to do. It's true, we have to speak about competitiveness because it's your thematic issue of the moment, is true. But you can't have a united Europe and you can't speak about a strong economy if we don't speak of a common foreign policy, if we don't speak of a common defense policy. We need to be united in everything. Europe has been, you know, for Chinese, for example, as like the colleague was speaking about the Chinese. I also had a very nice experience with the Chinese. They relate to us, speaking of Europe, as we don't do within ourselves and between ourselves. We always speak about French, Italian, Germany, UK, Luxembourg, Belgium, Netherlands. We never speak, we as Europeans, we never say so. Because, of course, it's normal. We want all our strength and our strong country to be, you know, always strong like in the past. But it's not possible. It's not feasible for the future. We are one Europe, and we will see that it will be a real united Europe if we do something together for the future and for you. But how we have to do it? We have to do it through the importance of research and development. We have to do it with the importance of technology. We have to do it with a strong, incredible quality in order to be more competitive. We don't need just the productivity. Don't think only to what was done in the past by us or by our fathers. Think about what we have to imagine new, what we have to create. Only in this way we can be a strong European Union and an important path for the future. Basically, you need to have courage, the courage that your fathers didn't have. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to turn to Mrs. Minister Wasiak, because as we all know, Poland is one of this country in European Union who survive impact of the crisis, not so bad, or even quite good. But could you tell me what is a step further to catch up even faster the West, which we are dreaming of catching for the last 25 years?
Chciałam nawiązać tutaj do tego, co mówiła moja poprzednia.
I would like to recall to what my predecessor said. In order to take up this topic, we should not be talking of Poland as a fragment of Europe. No, we have to talk of Poland, yes, being part of Europe, which is organically bound with Europe and dependent on Europe. And really, yes, we are in this part of Europe, which is catching up with the backlog compared to richer countries of Europe. But we have been put in a situation where the world has posed such challenges for Europe that our internal problems have to actually become of lesser importance. We have to consider the target concept for Europe operating as a commonwealth, economic and political, in order to cope, to manage dealing with the challenges the world is posing for us. My predecessor is right that from the perspective of China, Europe is a small area. Although it is better to be treated by the Chinese as part of the EU, which has which has 500 million people, rather than a country like Poland with 38 million people only. So this is the weight we are comparing to, and therefore the quality of this European integration and the way in which we finally shape Europe as a political and economical organism is decisive for how we will cope with worldwide challenges. There is a lot of hot discussion in progress. National separatisms are in place, which you cannot treat light, but of course they cannot be accepted. And for sure, in various countries, we also face various political concepts for coping with those challenges, and we also have to be able to come to agreement at European level about certain compromise. And also, wholeheartedly, I actually accept it. I sign in for it, saying in a stereotypic way that the future is with the young people. Well, this results from biology, but we must not mislead young people that we are showing them quite clear and foreseeable path towards what will be happening in the nearest years. No, the characteristics of this world is unforeseeability. So not that we tell the young people what will happen 10 or 20 years from now, but how to prepare them to be able to respond to the surprises which are ahead of them over these 10, 20 years. And there are lots of surprises and challenges ahead of them, and translating it into domestic perspective of utilizing EU funds mainly. Well, we, for example, put forth the task of increasing the number of students studying natural science and technology as compared to the current situation, because it seems that challenges from this area may be decisive for competitiveness educationally in young people. And this has to be said very bluntly, that today a good advice is do not go to study easy subjects. And this is what we can give you. Try today. Today we can say that it is not enough to be using a foreign language, because using a foreign language, going to another country, all of a sudden we notice that we cannot come to agreement. The difference of certain rules, family background, traditions is so big that it is a barrier in making business, in understanding the commercial agreements which we, for example, conclude with Chinese companies, for example. And this cultural barrier is much greater a challenge from understanding perspective compared to the language barrier. Of course, the first thing, I mean, the fact that you can go abroad, that today's contacts of young people in current Europe, especially in the post-communist Europe, are much more open, and that you can go there. It is a good opportunity, but it is no guarantee for us finding ready, tailor-made solutions there. Those challenges will be much more difficult compared to those in traditional economies 50 years ago, where everything was generally much more foreseeable. Today it is not so easy to foresee, so quite a difficult advice. Keep learning, studying, because your life will be difficult. However, this is more honest rather than saying, we will prepare everything for you so that you can only make use of it. No, that would not be fair.
I want to turn to Mrs. Kubilius. How do you, as a representative of Baltic state and much smaller member of European Union than Poland, what challenges do you think are similar in Lithuania and Poland, and which are different?
Well, thanks a lot, and good morning to everybody. Really, it's a pleasure to be here again. Last year I was here also during Krynica Forum. And it's not so easy perhaps to answer your precise question, differences in between of Lithuania and Poland. I don't see big differences. I would like really maybe to say some what colleagues on here were speaking about. I think that we all have very similar challenges, despite the fact are we larger countries or smaller countries, new members, old members. I am feeling myself still quite young, despite the fact that I am involved in Lithuanian politics for the last 25 years. I was 2 times Prime Minister, the first time in 2000 year, and I remember very well how in Europe we approved at that time, or it was approved, still we were not members, but we were participating in those discussions, so-called Lisbon strategy, where the main message was that in 2010 Europe will be more competitive than United States of America. For us who grew up in Soviet Union, we remember very well very similar statements by Nikita Khrushchev. And the Lisbon strategy, you know, as you know, the results were also very similar. We are much more behind US than we were in 2000. So, and it means that all those measures which we were trying to speak about, innovation, research and development, more funding for universities and so on, they are not bringing the results which we want to see. European competitiveness is not, we cannot resolve European competitiveness challenge, which is really a huge challenge, simply by some new technical measures. And my very simple conclusion is like this. We need to look more deeply into what I would call European mentality. Where are our problems? European ideology, I would say, and even what I would call, what can be named European dream. That's a problem with us. Our European dream is a little bit not allowing us to move forward with resolution of the biggest challenge, how to become competitive. Why? And Angela Merkel is using very precise numbers when she's speaking about challenges for Europe. Europe has 7% of world population. With immigrants, maybe we shall have a little bit more, but around 7%. We are producing around 20% of GDP worldwide. I don't know, maybe the numbers are shrinking perhaps, because China is coming. And we have around 50% of worldwide social spending. You can imagine what does it mean, those numbers. 7, 20, 50. I would say, you know, we are stretched because of such difference in numbers so heavily that we cannot be competitive. That's the problem. And this is what says to me that our European dream, which we can say, what is European dream? Security, stability, prosperity, brought us to those challenges of those numbers. So we need to change a little bit, at least a little bit, of our European dream, going out from dreaming about only security, stability, and prosperity, towards different ideology. dynamism, risk, adventure. That is, if we shall ask Europeans now, do you love risk? Europeans will say, no, we don't love. Do you love adventure? No. We want stability. We want prosperity. That is our dream. And with such a dream, we have 50% of social spending worldwide. So what we can say about, well, World Bank can explain much more about what does it mean. So, and you know, Europe of today was created because earlier, hundreds of years ago, Europeans were not afraid of risk. Europeans were not afraid of adventure. Columbus was big risk taker, big adventurist, you know, and that created all Western communities. So let's go back. How to do it? I agree absolutely. What was said before and what was in the morning session in Krynica Forum, what was said? Let's give power to young people, because really they are much more keen to make some adventure. Sometimes maybe this adventure will be not very, the results will be not very nice, but that is what we need to do. And I can conclude with a very simple remark. I don't know how it's written in Polish constitution, but in Lithuanian constitution, we have a very clear statement that Lithuanian president can be only the person who is older than 40 years old. That's the problem. We need to change into opposite. President can be only the person who is younger than 40 years old. If we shall bring such a mentality also to Europe, that commissioners and presidents of commission should be at least younger than 50 years old, that will change also mentality in Europe. At least that would bring change in the mentality which we would like to see.
Thank you. In Polish constitution is over 35 years. Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. And now I want to turn to audience. Okay. So maybe this one's.
Dzień dobry, Piotr Celiński, Warsaw Enterprise Institute. Będę mówił po polsku.
Good afternoon, Warsaw Prize Institute. My question is at Ms. Wasiak and strictly related to your ministry, infrastructure and development. So, Polish railways, until 2020, there are no new railway lines to be built and 4,000 roads to be built. We spend 70 billion for roads and 0 zlotys for railways. Warsaw, Wrocław, Poznań, the railway line, Y-shaped, or to Pyrzowice railway line. The last railway line, 2012, 2 kilometers built to Chopin Airport at 2 billion zlotys. A line to Mysłowice liquidated. If we talk of development, we are coming to a certain destruction of Polish railway market. This is my question. Well, thank you. I don't know where from you took the figures, because for railway program, including the EU funds and domestic funds in the railway program, which is now being proceeded, and it will be approved in a week's time by the Council of Ministers, it mentions 67 billion zlotys for the nearest year, so it is not a 0 figure, it is 67 billion. On top of this, both the program of railway construction as well as the road construction program includes very few new track investments. The 3,000 kilometers in the program of construction of national roads, in their majority, they are modernization, so they follow the line of existing roads, but improving the standard of the road, giving the required throughput because of the role of the communication connection. The situation is similar in railways. Railways are subject to modernization, and in the majority of cases on existing lines, yes, I agree, but with very significant change of their functionality. So here we must not say that there is disproportion, significant disproportion between development of road and railway transport. Of course, one may say that you must never be satisfied of what is in place as a method. You have to go for more always. Yes, definitely a significant feature of this program of our infrastructural investment projects related to this perspective until 2020 is still encouraging economy to use railway transport to a greater extent. It is both related to public transport. It's also actually encouraging the society that using railway transport is okay, but also availability of this railway transport in conurbations, because in railway transport we have quite well identified areas where railways should be developed, and those areas where railways are losing to road transport. Where they have prevalence, it is the mass cargo transport, where it is very difficult to be replaced, and it wouldn't be good if it was replaced by road transport. And passenger, well, it is a connection between large cities, and these are the areas where railways prove better than road transport. But the core of development and thinking in Europe about transport is not preference for one type of transport only for its own sake. It is complexity and actually adding up mutually to one another. And this is actually based on European programs, and all innovative solutions are going in this direction regarding public transport, where the integration is happening between the underground railway, buses, individual transport into one cohesive system. And this is a modern way of thinking about transport.
Yeah, please.
Hello, I'm greeting all panelists. I'm from Azerbaijan. My name is Rauf Ismailov. My question is about future of Europe. According to political writers, collapse of the Soviet Union caused a decrease of impact of or power of liberalism and liberal democracy. In addition, nationalism and national fundamentalism started to be stronger in all parts of the world. Do you think that it is reason that Europe became weaker than China or other biggest markets in the world?
Maybe World Bank, okay. Democracy works in Nepal.
We all looked at the World Bank.
No, I think it is very worrisome that in individual countries you see tendencies to start becoming very inward-looking, to be nationalistic, because that's the opposite of what you need to be successful in the long run. And sometimes in the short run it can play well politically, but it really backfires in the long run, and it has a lot to do with economic problems that are tough but are temporary. And so Europe, the European Union, went through a very long financial crisis, a banking crisis for all kinds of reasons. It's not easy to come out of it. When you look at Central Asia, when you look at the Russia, the eastern part, they have a very tough time at the moment with the fall in the oil prices. Take Azerbaijan, your country, as an example. You're losing this year 20% of your income because of terms of trade loss, and that is a huge shock that has to be absorbed. It is a bit less intense for Russia, but it's 10% income loss. It spreads to other countries who benefit from remittances. So it is true, there are tough times for countries, and it really requires political leadership to prevent that is being translated in that inward-looking approach. If you allow me, in the discussion, just to put things in perspective, I want to emphasize that differences across countries in Europe are not unique. Let's take China again as an example. Till now, they are about to change it, but there was no open labor market in China. There was the hukou system that meant that somebody who was born in one part could not automatically work in another part. And that makes actually a lot of sense. Europe had a lot of problems opening up the labor markets. And a few years ago, a group of mayors of big cities in China came to the European Union to learn from how Europe is dealing with international migration, because their domestic migration had very similar characteristics. How do you absorb other cultures into cities? How do you deal with providing services for all the migrants? And how do you deal with money that is sent back home? A country of 1.3 billion people. If you look at India, there are more languages spoken in India, different languages, than in Europe. There's no free trade between the states in India. I live in Bethesda, that is in Maryland, just outside of Washington. That's an area where 3 states are coming together. You have the District of Columbia, Washington itself, and then you have Virginia and you have Maryland. A real estate agent, a plumber who has a license in Maryland, doesn't have a license in Virginia, doesn't have a license in the District of Columbia. Every country, every group of countries, they're all struggling with the same problems. And we shouldn't be so pessimistic that Europe is unique and you cannot overcome it. And I very much agree with the minister that integrating further into Europe is the way to go forward, but it is not black and white. It is a gradual road, and ultimately it is up to you to make sure that integration is not only happening within Europe, but that Europe becomes very open also, and that becomes an integration into the world, and then you might have an advantage compared to other parts of the world.
Okay, maybe one more question this round. You are first.
Ja, bo będę mówił po polsku, jak to zwykle.
I'll be talking Polish. My name is Michał Rosiński and I represent Toruń Academy of Recreation and Fitness. And question to Madam Minister. What is the goal and how can the whole infrastructure of railway and roads be adapted to handicapped people, and who is controlling it? Because lots of things are being done, yes, seemingly adaptation, but a train comes in reality, there is railway, and a handicapped person cannot use it because there is 1.5 meter gap and the train is not adapted to the infrastructure. This is a very important element of our modernization type development. We may say that the general rule is that in all projects which enjoy European subsidies in transport area, the element of adaptation for the needs of handicapped people is an obligation, a must in the program. But this results in the fact that, as in new railway carriages being produced now, not modernized, but and in newly modernized infrastructure, this aspect of openness or being friendly to handicapped people is already taken into consideration. We still struggle with the old infrastructure, old railways, old railway carriages, which through simple modernization are not fulfilling the expectations which we already consider standard solutions regarding availability for handicapped people. And we also had, as I watched in the past, relatively big trouble with standardization of requirements in modernization already. There was lots of discussions with handicapped people, and even among them there were large differences in expectations regarding standardization, because standardization is very important here. So briefly speaking, for a solution, for example, of availability of people with seeing impairment to be the same. Well, as we were using a certain positive aspect in Poland, that means a high level of decentralization in utilization of EU funds and using them for infrastructural projects. Actually, local government aspect is important here. We, at the same time, didn't have sharp, tough tools enforcing standardization from the central perspective. Now we are learning it rather in such a way, like, for example, in my ministry, we are issuing various types of directions or advice, but it is not so that we have to choose the right way. It's better to get to agreement with local government investing in infrastructure rather than killing the whole project and taking over the tasks ourselves. This decentralization is also an achievement of Poland in our coping with problems. So, summarizing, the problem of availability for handicapped people is for sure today, as compared to the situation 10 years ago, much more visible and noticeable, but definitely not to such an extent actually taken care of as to make us satisfied of it. So it appears that when it seems that we will manage to cope with, let's say, people with seeing impairment, a railway station which we were recently opening in Nasielsk, there is a compact solution standardized which would be advisable for medium-sized towns, and there are very well thought over solutions for people with seeing impairment, but there are still always some certain handicaps which we have not taken into account so as people would expect it. So there is still a lot ahead of us, a lot to be done, but we have incomparably greater opportunities compared to 10, 15 years ago in coping with this problem.
Come back to the issue which was already raised by a few of the members of the panel, namely the Lisbon Agenda. And one of the important point of that, which is reducing bureaucracy. This is one of the biggest points raised by Eurosceptics, that European Union is overregulated, and because of that, they put a big barrier on small and middle entrepreneurship to grow and to become competitive with whole world. So what do you think about it? If you agree, what is your solution for this problem? And maybe first I would like to ask Mrs. Cantini.
I believe that, you know, the time now, the economical period now is at a stake, no, for the European Union. So now we have to decide. The stake also could be the moment, you know, of stop or a stake. What we are, it's a moment also that is very important because could become a very strong opportunity for the future, or we could go in the bad way. But I think that we are going into the opportunity one. And what I believe is that, as I said before, the importance is what we are imagining now, what we are imagining for the future of what we produce, of what we invent, and of the new ideas that we have. Unless there is the new ideas, the new inventions, the new technology, and the quality that is there, it's very difficult to imagine that only the production, you know, and the circle of production is enough, because the market is saturated, and we need to go far away from that. So we need to think about it. So the idea is, let's always is starting from the political point of view, that we need to overcome and imagine and dream what is our future for all of you, and also the idea of imagining that there is a possibility to overcome this problem. We passed now very difficult 5 or 6 years, which was for us the most important economical crisis, not only after the 1929, and this created for all of us a big problem. So what you see now, very weak countries, a very weak Europe, is something that we hope is over. So for the future, we need to imagine to start up something new, with new ideas, with new technology and new possibilities. Thank you.
Okay, so maybe because Mrs. Timmer is running out of time, do you can answer to that question? Is?
Yeah, I think it's not about the number of regulations, it's about whether you have the right regulations. And sometimes regulations actually makes life easier. Take the regulation of the telecom market in the European Union, where you're no longer allowed to charge roaming in other countries. That creates a level playing field, a big area of competition, and much easier life for people. I think you have to ask yourself the question whether regulation prohibits new developments and protects vested interest. And Uber is a very good example. Yeah. So how do we deal with a new development like that? Do we embrace that? Or do we say, no, we don't want it because we have regulation for the old cab drivers and they have their vested interest? Once you embrace it and you encourage those new developments, which ultimately will lead to success, it doesn't mean that you don't have to regulate that. Because you do need regulation for safety, for fair competition, for all kinds of issues. So it's all about the right regulations that are conducive to the new development and for progress. And I really apologize. I have to go back to that other, more boring forum again. I would like to have had the opportunity to stay all day here. Sorry so much.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, and I just want to ask Mr. Kubilis about the same topic about the Lisbon Agenda and EU 2020 in context of how countries and other countries in Europe, which is not in the European Union, is dealing. Because, for example, Switzerland is a leader worldwide in competitiveness, and they took a slightly other way. So what do you think about our current EU 2020 plan, which we can maybe change it to a more Swiss model, or is good for now?
Well, I am not feeling myself a very good expert on Swiss model, but maybe I will continue what was asked before about European bureaucracy. Is that good or bad? Is that pushes forward European competitiveness or not? And I think that it's a very, very important question, very good question. Of course, there are some regulations which perhaps are stupid and which should be abolished. But also, from another side, we need to understand that what Europe managed to achieve during the history of the European Union is really beneficial and creates a lot of opportunities for much stronger competitiveness. And I think that Swiss exactly is using this, being outside, but also using all the single market, which benefits, which brings single market of European Union, single currency, you know, which is also, well, have some problems, but is becoming stronger and stronger, and it creates a lot of new opportunities. So what we can see really is that there are some countries like Switzerland, which are outside of EU regulation, but which takes a lot of EU, let's say, standards, which are very competitive. But also there are some countries inside of EU, which if you will look into World Economic Forum Competitiveness Index, you will see that they are very competitive, like Scandinavian countries, for example, which we are trying to follow their example. And then you can ask yourself, so what are the reasons why they are so competitive? Do they have smaller bureaucracy? Not at all. Everybody knows that Scandinavians are really, they have quite a large bureaucracy. They have larger redistribution of their taxes through the budget than in average in EU. So I mean that you can see that bureaucracy can be really very proactive, pushing forward developments of competitiveness in different countries. And perhaps this is an example which we need to look how it can be spread all over Europe. How to make some kind of changes in how EU is managed, how EU bureaucracy should work, that it should follow those good examples which we have in EU. EU is not a totally bad story. There are very nice examples which can be used looking to the future.
Okay, thank you. Is there any more question on the hall? No? Okay, thank you. So I will conclude on that. Thank you so much for our panelists. And thank you.